G'day, welcome back. This is the next video in my series on corresponding squares. So far we've looked at positions by Grigoriev and Karras and Muller and so on to try and demonstrate the method of corresponding squares. That is, in endgame positions, mainly with pawns, you find the key squares and then the Zugzwang positions, which are corresponding squares, and to work out whether the position is a win or a draw. In trying to find more examples of this, I'm actually moving on to another of my endgame books, Endgame Preparation by Jon Speelman. It's one of two books I have by Jon Speelman. Now, he was a very strong English grandmaster of the late 80s and early 90s. He actually participated in two candidates cycles, only losing to Timon in the 1990 cycle, and he got knocked out fairly quickly in 1993, but once again he had been at that level. And having a look at these two chess books I have by him, he was obviously a very strong endgame player, and it's probably worthwhile looking at some of his endgames as well. What we're going to look at today is some of the positions which he has in a chapter on corresponding squares, where he draws on a lot of the work by Averbach and Mazelis in their book Pawn Endings or Endgames. Let's just have a quick look at what we're going to try and do here. Now, if I turn over to my analysis page, this is not the position we're studying today, but this is the position we will spend a couple of videos on. There's still some dynamism in terms of pawn moves and so on, and this position is loaded with opposition possibilities and analysis. It's actually quite intense if you look at the page on the book, which we'll probably do in one or two videos. What we're going to look at today is a position which arrives from a variation of this. In fact, I'll just bring up, he wrote, don't look at the diagram too closely if you want to do the analysis yourself. Reading the text, I should mention that during play from diagram 93, which is the one I've shown you, black may always play a5. Fair enough. You can imagine if a5 is played, move white's king, a5 played. In a lot of positions, if you take, then your rook pawns, it'll be drawn. So you won't want to do that, but continuing with the text. But that this will always lose to b5. Even if the white king isn't yet on the fourth rank, he can force it there, since the black king must stay inside the square. So we're going to look at two issues today. It's going to be in, just let me move to the, it's going to be in this position where we show white shouldering himself to get to the fourth rank, and in this position, which I've already marked the key square on, which is the classic corresponding square analysis with a triangulation in it, which is why I picked this. It's got a very obvious triangulation, which can demonstrate that method of winning once again. So that's the two. What we might look at first, actually, is this one. So if you didn't look at that diagram, don't look at that diagram, look at the board. And I've marked the key square for you. It's fairly obvious if white's on that square with his king, then he'll pick up the pawn or march forwards, be pawn through. Many ways of winning from this position. Think about the mapping of corresponding squares from that position. Now, you might get the black king out of the way as well. And variation. So how do we do this? Once again, we had key square was there. Now, if white is on c5, threatening to go to key square, also threatening to move to c6, which would be a trivial win once you're there as well. I mean, c6 could probably be considered a key square as well. So that's what black has to put up with. And if black is on that a c7 square, you can see the problem with that is that white will push his pawn with check and then run across and pick up the a pawn. So that ain't going to work either. Covering basically these two squares, you can see that the only square available for that as a corresponding square is a b7. Okay, we got one set of them matched out. So let's move on to the next square we want to look at. Let's have a look at the corresponding square to the D5 square. Now, once again, white is threatening to go on to C5, which is corresponding square 1, so black has to move to that. And we're also threatening to go to C6, which let's call that a key square for lack of. Black is going to have to be on C7 to cover both of those squares. And now what you do is you sort of try and look at the sort of the triangle positions in the position, right? So that's the most obvious triangle position. If white got to that position, threatening to go to corresponding square 1, corresponding square 2, and also C6. So the only square corresponding to that is the B6 square. So far, so good. Everything seems to be covered. And now we get this situation we've seen before where white has an extra row to deal with, and maybe black doesn't have the space to be able to do the same thing. So let's pick a square. Speelman labels them a bit more differently. Let me just call square there, square 4. We're threatening to go to 2, and we're threatening to go to 3. And actually, there is no square for black. Black would cover that ordinarily with the C6 square, but the C6 square is covered by the pawn. So that's obviously not going to work. So, in fact, we've already got the setup we need, and we've also got that square there. Right? Black just doesn't have the corresponding squares available. So let's see how that plays out. Okay, here's the position. Let me just king e4, approaching with the king, king c8. This is just moving up to the position we need to start on. Right, okay, so white's moved on to c5, square number 1. Black has to cover. Now we go to square 2. Black has to cover. And this is where I mark that 4. So go to square 4. Now black doesn't have anywhere really to go to. This is just playing through the line which Speelman has. And now the point is, so at the moment, black's still okay. Black can still go to squares 2 and squares 3, so we can't go to there. But we do our triangulation. We've gone to e5. There's no matching square. So now if black goes on square 2, we'll go to square 2. If black goes to square 3, we'll go to square 3. And he might go to the back row, but in the back row he can't go to square 3, right? So there's nothing to be done. So what's the next move we look at? Let's say he went on to c7, which is square 2. We go on to d5, which is square 2. Go to square 3, go to square 3. And now he's going to have to give up well, he goes to square 1. We go to square 1. And now he has to back off. Because, as I said, if he goes to square 2, check with the pawn, then it's within analysis wins. That's it. That's the corresponding squares. Now, I said there was a triangulation in here, and exactly there was. If you remember back, we played there, there, there. So that was the triangulation. Yeah. So basically, it's 3 moves to sort of move what would normally take it backwards and forwards to move. You're giving up the tempo, and black couldn't hold the position anymore. Now we're going to move on to the second bit, which actually is probably worth running my program. We didn't. You can see that on the text version of it. We can't because this is in the way now. Stars are everywhere. Stars are there everywhere. All these are stars. And basically that means that it doesn't matter where the white and black kings are. It's a win in all positions. Because even if black was able to take the a4 pawn, it wouldn't help because the white b5 pawn would just be pushed. And that's the whole point. He's restricted in the square. And you can see it doesn't render very well on this one, but the idea is that I basically normally only take the first star in a column, but basically the whole board is a win for white. That's where we get the second position we're going to look at. No, save, I went to the wrong one. Click a bit more accurately. Okay, so this position we're talking about. How does white get forwards? So basically if white can push forwards, then we get that corresponding square position we were just looking at. What I will do here is I need to, the one that was there was correct. Okay, so let's have a look at this. So I was reading from the wrong page. You can see the continuation. Speelman gives you king to f3. Now, I said, got to stay inside the square. Right? Because that's how people normally do it. Can't go out the square. You would like to go f5, cannot go to f5. You can see that's what Speelman points out. so he has to back off. And king d5 is suggested, king d5. Oh, and this is where I was sort of saying that the corresponding squares like that, but he can't hold them, right? If we go back to e3, then of course black will go to e5. So we need to go another way, and this is where we basically shoulder around the side, king f4. There's not a lot that black can do about this, suggesting king d6, taking diagonal opposition, king e4, king e6. So now we've moved forward one row already, and then now king d4, king d6, king c4. The exclamation mark means that's kind of the only winning move, although obviously you could back off and try the same thing again, because same problem. That square is covered by the pawn. Cannot get the covering square. So now if you move back to king c7, king to c5. So you can see that even if white starts in a disadvantageous position because the square is holding the black king back and the c6 square is not available as an opposition square, there's nothing black can do. And we get to this position, which we just covered before. And what I might do, because I did a little bit boo-boo last time, it's actually, this was the page I should have had up. Go back to what I had on screen, like that. What is unfortunate for black is that there are two white squares, d5 and e6, corresponding to black's c7. Now he's called it the same square. It doesn't really matter. I showed that before. So then that was a continuation we went through, and it was this triangulating on these three squares that let white get through. So just to close up, I will now run a Venn diagram thing. Let me undo that. Okay, good. So here we go. You can see that the corresponding squares are laid out there as on the chart. I actually have marked C6 as the key square there. I mean, basically everywhere is key square because everywhere wins. But on the other hand, I think C6 and B6, it's quite easy to understand why they are key squares. And then finally, you can see the problem that was faced by black. The extra squares, E5 and E6, give these extra routes between D5 and D6, which is not matched by black. So that's why white's able to use those extra squares to trip up and then get back and get access to C6. Okay, I hope that was helpful and interesting. Just another example, another sort of practice on corresponding squares. And we'll move on to that slightly more complicated position, which I was talking about at the start, where white has the pawns. He hasn't pushed his pawn to b5 yet, and he has to engineer a better position, if he can, to win from that position. However, if you ever meet this position in a game, the triangle structure we've been looking at for a while, pawns on a4 and b5, and a black pawn on a5, always winning for white. You shoulder up to the fifth rank, and then you use corresponding squares to advance your pawns. Great. Thank you very much for watching.